Alright, we'll be looking at Andrew Jackson today. And so the thing we're going to be looking at here is we want to discuss the Democratic Revolution that was to culminate during the presidency of Andrew Jackson. Also discuss his contributions to the development of the federal government and demonstrate his view of the presidency by using Jackson's attack on the Second Bank of the United States to demonstrate that understanding. So for learning objective 1, we want to discuss the development of the Democratic Revolution in the United States from 1776, one second here, from 1776 to 1828. So the period from 1776 to 1828 is often looked upon by historians as a democratic revolution that was to culminate in Jacksonian democracy, 1828 to 1840. So there's a few ways of characterizing this so-called democratic revolution during this time period of 1776 to 1828 by looking at these lists of terms here, from idealism all the way to a change in the political system. So starting with idealism, we want to look at with idealism, it was politically during the 1820s, there was universal agreement that advancement of democratic institutions and idealism of American Revolution could be used by different socioeconomic groups to advance their own special interests. So this belief led to wide support for political change within society. So examples of this is what you'll be reading about in The Intimately Oppressed. The assigned reading for this week is the beginning of the women's suffrage movement. So this is something you want to see of them. Basically what's going on here is they're looking at the political rhetoric of the American Revolution and the ideals that we're all familiar with, that all people are created equal, we're all endowed with unalienable rights by the Creator. All of these enlightened principles are breaking down set hierarchies that had been established for many years, many generations. They're being challenged by people like, well, women who say, yes, I also have unalienable rights, and if I'm held accountable by law and I'm expected to pay taxes, then of course I should have access to the political machinery and in the process of voting and or maybe perhaps even holding office. So look for that as you're reading just the details of that, and offer examples as you're instructed in the second part of learning objective 1. And also you have issues of sectionalism that are developing strongly by the 1820s. So strong disagreements over key economic issues had polarized the geographical sections of the North, here in purple, the South, and the West, unorganized territories here, mainly dealing with, of course, the issue of slavery at this point. And then you have conflict between social economic groups. Basically the conflict between social and economic interest groups within each section and between the section also led to motivations for political change. So during this time, the northern business class found its interests threatened by opposition from farmers, laborers, and southern planters, for example. And then we have changes in the overall political changes in the economic and political conditions, which require us to look at two other events. We're also primarily responsible for political event changes. So economically, you have the first industrial revolution happening at this time. The development of this revolution led to the change in political needs of different social and economic groups, as well as the geographical sections of the country. Many people saw the possibility of using the powers of government either to resist or promote the Industrial Revolution. Next was political. The Western territorial expansion of the United States caused a change in the political needs in geographical sections of the country and accelerated the pressures to expand participation in government. Also, as Western states joined the Union, they adopted constitutions that gave the right to vote and hold office to all white males over 21. This put pressure on the eastern states to follow suit by dropping property requirements for voting and holding office. They also hoped to this would keep residents from moving west in order to keep up with the liberalization of suffrage that was going on in the West as this organized territory is one by one becoming states from the 1820s on. So, for example, between 1812 and 1821, 6 Western states entered the Union, with constituents providing for universal white male suffrage, or a close approximation of that. And from 1810 to 1821, 4 of the older states also substantially dropped property qualifications for voters. So this might seem quaint to us that, oh, so what, a bunch of white people can now vote at this time. But this is truly revolutionary for this time, that those without property and those as would have been perceived by the more elite political and economic classes of those who don't really have a true stake in society are now able to vote, mainly to express their stake in society. So then we begin seeing a change in the political system overall. So by 1840, the electorate included more than 90% of the adult white population. That's 90% of the adult white male population. That is, 90% of white males were able to vote by 1840. And so by this time, most states had established direct popular election of governors. Property qualifications were no longer needed, presidential electors, and some judges. Hence, not only could more people vote, they could vote for more of their government officials. In addition, a new generation of politicians emerged that appealed in different and innovative ways to the newly expanded electorate. That is, more people voting. That phenomena is creating a new type of politician. This factor was not very consequential in the countryside, where almost everyone had possessed the minimum qualifications for voting, but in the cities, significant groups of artisan, jurymen, and even laborers were stirred to political consciousness. This changing character of the electorate was also important because it influenced both the style and methods of politics. So this new generation of political leaders encouraged the common feeling that the popular will of the people should control the choice of public officers and the formation of public policy, or at least the persona of that was put out by politicians running for office within this new dynamic of more and more people being able to vote. So this new generation of political leaders directed popular resentment against traditional caucus club systems, which they branded as flagrant usurpation of the rights of the people. They also spread the conviction that the control of politics must be taken from the hands of the social elite and open up to the participation of the common person. So generally speaking, how this plays out in policy changes as the political movement developed, popular demands arose for laws to prevent imprisonment for debt. So we begin seeing the end of debtor prisons, a national bankruptcy law, a new tariff and public land policies. So for the first time, many Americans thought of politics as having an intimate relation to their welfare. And adding to the complexity of the situation were the chief means of educating and informing the common person. So you have free public schools are beginning to emerge in certain parts of New England and parts of the West, and inexpensive newspapers are becoming widely available at this time. In summary, as a result of all these changes, the voting public became much larger, more complex in its composition, meaning there was more voters and it was more variables within the population, better informed and educated, more emotionally involved in politics. The style and method of politics changed, and a feeling that politics was to be taken from the hands of the social elite and opened up and open to participation by the common man was kind of the ethos of this time. That's described as Jacksonian democracy. So there was political agreement within the country until the early 1820s. The political complacency that existed up until the 1820s was reflected by the fact that the Democratic Republican Party was the only party that existed between the presidential elections of 1816 to 1824. Sometimes this is referred to as the era of good feelings, which we'll look more at in the next lecture series. By this time, the different social, economic interests started to pool at different sectional interests of the country. The intense rivalry between the sectional, social, and economic needs of the different interest groups finally had its political impact in the presidential election of 1824. This caused the Democratic Republican Party to split into two parties. The Democratic Republican Party formed by Andrew Jackson and the National Republican Party headed by John Quincy Adams. So there was a split within this party that is going to have huge consequences. Again, we'll look more at detail when we look at the lecture on the two-party system of this election. But for now, Andrew Jackson's entrance into politics is seen as a bellwether of this so-called democratic revolution. So the second part of Learning Objective 1 is, after reading The Intimately Oppressed, identify how the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848 was a prominent example of the democratic revolution that culminated during the Jacksonian era. Also identify at least two examples of the democratic revolution in this assigned chapter as you're reading through it. Alright, that concludes Learning Objective 1. I will see you in Learning Objective 2. Talk to you guys later.